Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Not safe for work. What has been your spine-tingling, bone-chilling, I have a bad feeling about this experience? What happened? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was out walking my dog when I got a funny feeling about my dad. He has heart problems and is prone to heart attacks. I called him a few times and he didn't respond, so I started to run back and he was slumped in front of the sofa, showing all the early signs of a heart attack. I phoned an ambulance and gave him basic treatment, and after the paramedics arrived, they said if I had been any later, he would have died. I woke up in a panic early one weekend morning and checked my phone. It was like waking up from a nightmare. I felt prickles and tingles and my heart was racing. Woke up from dead sleep to fight or flight mode, except I hadn't been dreaming. Found a suspiciously sentimental text from my best friend sent some hours earlier in the wee hours of the morning. Raced to his house, walked into his unlocked front door calling his name. He'd attempted the worst. Thank God he was still alive, but I was able to intervene enough that he didn't succeed in another attempt. He's doing amazing today. Just finished his master's and is now in medical school. Nothing bad actually happened, but I was 12 or 13 and taking horse riding lessons. I'd usually be in a class with two other girls, but this week neither of them were there. No big deal. There was a new male instructor who'd taken my lesson. Instead of using the rink, I forgot what they're called, by the stables, we go to the one 5-minute ride away up on a hill surrounded by trees. I thought it was a bit weird seeing as the usual one was free. On the ride up, he asked me if I had a boyfriend, if I liked boys, and if I'd liked other 13-year-olds. I was really shy back then and just sort of said that I didn't have a boyfriend and shrugged off the other question. When we got to the rink, he makes a big deal of my stirrups not being adjusted properly, and although I was pretty experienced and knew them to be fine, he kept readjusting them for me, touching my thighs a bit too much while explaining the position they need to be in. Now, normally that's nothing sinister in horse riding, but I just had a bad feeling and must have been looking uncomfortable and too quiet because he said, "You can tell me anything. Anything that happens up here will be our secret." Then he asks me about boys again. I said the stirrups are fine and I'm ready to start the lesson. I'm going to sound deluded here, but at that very moment, the horse I was on, normally a stubborn old bugger who barely wanted to move, stomped his foot, took off and started walking round the rink, behaving like an angel for the entire lesson. And on the walk back down to the stables, he kept stopping whenever the instructor got too close and gave little warning air bites when he did. I didn't say anything, but the instructor was gone the next week. I used to be a 5-minute drive home from work and would always go home and make a sandwich or nap on my lunch hour. This warm September, however, in the late morning, there was a fire out in a pasture that had crews already on it with uncontrollable, unrelenting winds that gave me a sinking feeling. After having a quick lunch and reaching out to my roommate who couldn't make it back, we opted for me to throw all of our valuables in my little Toyota Corolla and get the hell out. That fire in the matter of an hour had spread at least a couple of miles, and as a result, our residents and about half the town had succumbed to one of the worst in a series of fires across the state of Oregon, happening only 17 months ago. Was walking to get groceries and expecting a message from my girlfriend with a shopping list. Felt a phantom vibration from my phone, stopped for a second to check it, and right then a chunk of ice the size of a grapefruit smashed into the street directly in front of me, where my head would have been. When I was in university, I once went to a local pool to go swimming. Afterwards, I went into the totally empty changing rooms and into a cubicle to get changed. Then I heard someone go into the cubicle directly next to me, which was strange because there were so many other options. Slightly paranoid, I silently picked up my stuff and moved to the one further away. Never felt the need to do this before, but something felt off. Again, someone ended up in the one directly next to me. I thought it was very odd, so got my phone out and procrastinated for a while, figuring that whoever it was would eventually get bored and leave if it was something dodgy. But I realized in the whole time I was there, it was completely silent. There was no movement of zippers, towels, etc. that you would expect to hear from someone getting changed. I'm now totally unnerved. My gut told me to check under the cubicle divider, so I made it seem natural by making the motion as though I was pulling down my swimming bottoms. Lo and behold, there's a man's hand there with a camera phone filming me. The police were called, etc. Turns out he's done it to at least one other young woman, and not only that, but the pool staff knew him because it's where he takes his young daughter to learn to swim. It was the day before my wedding, and I went on a walk around my very safe neighborhood. I had my headphones in and the music playing loudly. There were cars parked here and there, up and down the long street. The houses in this neighborhood have relatively large plots of land, so there is some space between the houses. About halfway down the street, I came to a car that had been parked for at least the 5 minutes it took for me to get to it. As I passed it, I noticed there were 4, maybe 5 males in their early 20s. I didn't think anything of it. I walked maybe 50 or more feet and got this awful feeling in my stomach. I turned around to find that they had crept their car up so that they were literally right behind me. I hadn't heard the car because my headphones were in. By absolute sheer luck, I spotted an older man and woman working in their garden about 5 houses down, big plots of land, so they were a bit away. I booked it to them and asked if I could just wait with them. The older guy went over to the car and asked them what they were doing, and they said they were there to do some yard work for one of the neighbors and pointed to the house they were now parked in front of, not the house they had been sitting in front of before. The guy told him he didn't believe them and to take a hike or he'd call the police. The guy then told me that the house they had been originally sitting in front of before was of a neighbor who was out of town. Because the 5 or so houses down, the couple hadn't noticed the car or me before I came running up to them. I often think back of that incident and feel very strongly that had I not gotten that awful feeling that compelled me to turn around, and if that couple had not been in their front yard for me to quickly spot, there would have been a different ending to the story, and the day before my wedding at that. New Year's Eve, many years ago, girlfriend and I went to spend the night at our former roommate's new place. They were a gay couple back before it was accepted as it is today. An hour before midnight, I felt a crazy urge to go home and started a fight about it with my girlfriend because she wanted to stay like we planned. I won the argument and got my way, and we left in such a hurry that we forgot our blankets and pillows. A couple hours later in the middle of the night, someone came by and set their house on fire, and both friends died. I'm still effed up about it today because I know that someone came by that night wanting to buy some kind of pills off one of my friends and was quite rudely turned away. I wasn't paying attention enough to see their face, so I don't know who it was, but I know it in my bones that's the guy that did it. Walked past a parked car not too late at night walking home from the gym. Noticed people inside but didn't think too much of it. Got this crazy urge to run about 10 seconds later, so I ran and then sat down and hid behind a car down a side street. The car screeched out of the car park, down the street, down my side street, and then these guys started yelling, telling me to come out and that they're going to kill me. They slowly drove past me with their high beams on and then kept going a bit further before they sped off. I have no idea what I saw or what was going on in that car, but the whole thing freaks me out to this day. It was about 9 or 10 of the evening, and I was heading home from a really bad date. It was a 10 minutes walk from where I was to my home, and I stopped by a red light and waited. It was in the middle of the week, and on the way from my date to the red light, I've met like one person, so there wasn't a lot of people out. From nowhere, I got a really bad feeling, and I knew that someone was watching me. I turned around, and there was a man right beside me. He stood just a bit too close. He saw that I've seen him and started talking about how nice the summer rain was. I ignored him and started walking, although the light still was red. He started walking too. I sped up for a bit, so did he. My fight, flight, or freeze immediately hit, and from nowhere I stopped walking. He was caught off guard and took a few more steps before he stopped too. He asked me why I stopped, and I almost yelled at him that I didn't want to speak to him, that his behavior is freaking me out, and told him to keep walking. He started to argue and I yelled, "Just go!" He started walking slowly. I stood still, watching him as he walked. The feeling in my stomach didn't go. He started walking slowly. I stood still, watching him as he walked. The feeling in my stomach didn't leave. It actually was getting worse. He stopped by a bus stop, and for a second I breathed out. He was waiting for the bus. Well, just next to the bus stop was an alley, a really dark alley, and behind it a dark parking lot. He stared at me while he stood there. He was waiting for me. I tried to contact a friend, no answer. I hid behind some construction materials, and on the third try, I managed to contact a friend. She wasn't home and couldn't help me. She asked if there was anyone else there, and I said no. Eventually, there was a man and 2 women walking by. She told me to tell them what's happening. During this time, the guy hadn't stopped staring at me for a second. When I walked up to the group to ask if I could walk with them, he suddenly started walking away. I was right. He was waiting for me. I walked with the group for a bit, but they were turning left at the next red light, and I was going the other side. I thanked them for helping me. We walked our separate ways, and within seconds, the guy showed up again. I froze completely, and fortunately the group caught it and ran over to me. The guy saw them, turned around and walked away. They walked me to my doorstep, and I thanked them over and over again. I am 100% sure that he planned on doing something horrible to me. I'm forever thankful for those 3 strangers who might have saved my life that night. Me and my friends were waiting for a bus when a group of guys came along. One asked us for $1, which we gave him, and then they just stayed to chat. They were perfectly nice, but all 3 of us had a really bad feeling. They asked us if we wanted to come to a party with them. We said, "Oh, no thanks, gotta get home." 1 week later, one of the guys was on the front page of the newspaper. He had just been released from prison for stabbing someone and had done it again that night. When my kids went to bed, I used to go out to the barn where I had a bottle of whiskey stashed. I'd have a drink and ponder the day, think about my late wife, and attempt to decompress. I suffered heavily with PTSD. Add to that the recent loss of my wife, the stress of raising 2 children that didn't really know me, and intense pain from severe burns I'd received before leaving the Marine Corps. It's safe to admit that I was extremely suicidal. One particular night, I wrote out a long letter to my family, letters to my children, and placed them along with my will, financial documents, etc. on the kitchen table. I went out to the barn with a .40 caliber pistol and had every intention of getting drunk and eating around. I was as low as I've ever been in my life. All of a sudden, my dad walked into the barn. He lived 2 hours away, and we hadn't spoken in a couple of weeks. He picked up the handgun, cleared it, dropped the magazine without a word. I asked him what he was doing there at 10:30 p.m. and he said, "I had a bad feeling. Let's talk." That's the one and only time I've ever seen my dad cry. That's the only time we've ever spoken in detail about our individual horrors of combat. My dad saved my life that night, and I made sure to live my life in such a way as to make him proud of everything I do. Good. Okay, I have 2 of these, but the first is why I'll always trust my gut. When I was little, I always used to sleep over at my cousin's house, who had an awesome wooden bunk bed that I would sleep on the bottom bunk. When I was 7, I went over for another sleepover. We ate Chinese food with my aunt and uncle, then me and my cousin stayed up late playing video games before going to bed. When I was little, I used to fall asleep right away and sleep deeply. My family still jokes that not even a car going through the house could wake me up. Anyways, sometime after I've fallen asleep, I wake because I have this ridiculous feeling that I have to roll over. I didn't want to because I was comfortable and sleeping how I normally do in the middle of the bed with my foot hanging off. I kept arguing with what felt like myself over rolling over until finally I did. But apparently it wasn't enough, because then I had the urge to literally cuddle as tight as I can against the wall. Since I had already rolled over, I figured why not? As I'm trying to press myself as hard as possible against the wall, the bunk bed collapses and a broken metal bar goes straight through the bed where I had been sleeping. I was stuck, somehow unharmed, in that little space against the wall until my uncle could cut me out. My cousin had fallen from the top bunk when it collapsed, but was also unharmed. Next happened when I was 16 in the summer. I grew up in a super small town and used to walk or bike everywhere with my dog, and I was usually alone. I had the day off from work, so I took a book and walked with my lab 4 miles to one of my favorite lakes and laid down on the beach to read a book and tan while my dog played in the water. After a few hours of being there, I noticed a rowdy group of guys. One who looked a bit familiar. It was a weekday, so there was only me, my dog, and a fisherman at the landing with these guys. I tried to ignore them, but noticed they kept looking over at me and whispering to each other. Then my dog, who usually will stay in the water the full time, in there, came over and laid in between me and this group. I got a bad feeling from them and decided to cut my day short and go home. I grabbed my stuff and started to walk out of there like nothing happened, and this group starts to follow me. Not only do I have a bad feeling, but I can tell my dog is freaked out because she keeps looking behind me and growling. This group is getting louder behind me and somehow keeping up with me, which is a feat because I'm a fast walker, so I know they're doing this on purpose. I'm trying to think of a way out of this situation, knowing in the middle of the week I won't get much help from neighbors and no one's really around. So then I start to think on the one kid that looked familiar, and it suddenly hits me. I know him. So I suddenly spin around and address him by name and tell him I used to change his diapers, which causes his friends to burst out laughing. I allow them close enough to walk with me to try and take control of the situation and ask him about his family and brother. They ask me what I'm doing that day, and I still feel super creeped out and my dog won't come near us. So I lie and say my brother is just up the road and I'm going to meet him. And I throw in that I'll hang back and let them walk ahead because my dog is clearly uncomfortable, which I lie again and tell them she was abused by a man and hates men. They say they're going back to the beach and turn around and leave. 1 year later, I hear about a gruesome murder the next town over. This kid and his friends broke into a 75-year-old grandpa's house, robbed him, and brutally beat and tortured him to death. The kid I knew was only 14. The friends he was with ranged from 16 to 23. I don't know if they were planning on doing anything to me that day, but I will always trust my gut and have since.